Well, we'll try this again. Hopefully, some of you will head over to this one now. All right. Hey, Chelsea. That worked perfectly until I came back up on the screen, and then I'm going to have to read up on that. So we were trying to start a few minutes early so folks could get on and it wouldn't just be me rambling here for a while. So hopefully everybody will get a chance to hop on over. So we'll go back to just waiting for everybody to show up. So I know there were at least six or seven eyeballs on the original video. Now we're at 2, so let's try this again. Hopefully we'll see some more friends here. There, it looks like some folks are coming back on. Sorry about that, friends. There was a little bit of a glitch when I went back to my video. All of that effort in hopes of giving you a chance to get on. But anyway, welcome back. It is another open door at 4 where we take your questions. We're going to be answering some questions today. I'm sharing this video on another page, so if this is something that you'd like to share with your friends, let me encourage you to do that as well so they can see it. It doesn't always come up from the page. So give me a second while I manage these devices here. Hope you guys are all doing well. We got some good questions today, so let's jump right into it. 403, so that's not too bad. All right, welcome back to another Open Door at 4. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions, and we take some time here on the Peaceworks page a couple times a month to answer some questions. And this is really a similar version to what we do each and every month in the Peaceworks University group. And there we have a lot more time together. We answer in a lot more detail. And so I would invite you, if you're not part of Peaceworks University, and you'd be interested in more material like this, to head over to chrismoles.org and sign up for that. Okay, looks like everybody's found their way over to the correct feed. Sorry about that. And let's jump right into the questions. We got a few today. We'll see how many we can get through. Okay, so here's the first question. In your research and or experience, have you found a link between pornography addiction and abuse, specifically narcissistic abuse is the question. So yes, there is a link. It's probably not as conclusive as a lot of people would like to make it. So let's just deal with the things that are obvious, okay? So when you're talking about pornography use and pornography addiction, there's definitely a connection between objectification. And so when you're thinking about the 4 pillars of domestic abuse, if you've heard me speak on that, or perhaps on the podcast, have heard me talk about that, there's an abuse of power. Objectification is number 2. Number 3 is forced submission, which really is subjugation or oppression. And then impunity, so violence or abuse with little to no consequences on the abuser. Objectification is a pretty significant factor in abuse, and obviously objectification is really at the heart of pornography and pornography use. So yes, I would say there's a connection in that regard. Also, it's very common to find among individuals who are using coercive controlling behavior, it's very common to find co-occurring issues. And so it's not uncommon as you're dealing with abuse to find that the individual who's using coercive control is also maybe addicted to drugs or alcohol or gambling or pornography, infidelity, other types of sexual sin. So co-occurring issues are quite frequent. Now, here's my caution. This is one of my areas where I push back a little bit on. While there are connections, I would not say that it's causative. For instance, I think pornography is pretty evil. I'm not, obviously, I think it's objectifying. I think it distorts sexuality. I think it's sinful in its use and certainly in the way that it informs sexuality. However, there's no indication that it's causative, that somebody who uses pornography will be abusive, or that somebody who is abusive therefore must be using pornography. It doesn't have a link like that. It has a link, I believe, in the same way that abuse and pornography use and objectification and misogyny and all of these things flow out of the heart. And so I do think it is connected in that way. When I do interventions, I rarely do both abuser intervention and a pornography intervention or pornography counseling or gambling or addiction. I try to refer that out and deal with them on parallel tracks. And one of the reasons why is I find that co-occurring issues, when addressed in the process of an intervention, like directly related, tend to favor the abuser rather than the victim. And a good example would be drug or alcohol addiction, where an abuser would really say, you know, I need to be sober. If you could help me reach sobriety, then everyone in my life will be safe, as opposed to what he really needs is a transformation at the level of the heart, changing the way he believes and the way he thinks, and that'll therefore affect the way he behaves. And while we want the addiction, whether it's to porn or substances, to stop, we usually have that as a parallel track of intervention. I hope that makes sense. Number 2 question for today. It's good to see everybody popping on. I really appreciate you guys joining us. This is a lot of fun. And hopefully this is a helpful time for you. This question's fairly lengthy. In psychological abuse, so there's a specific category here that's being mentioned, there are many invisible cuts and bruises that are extremely damaging to the spirit of another. So that's true. When you're thinking about what the question means by psychological abuse, it usually revolves around things like crazy making or gaslighting, using fear tactics, that type of unsettling, walking on eggshells type of thing. But because there's a lack of physical evidence, so there's no physical cuts or bruises, generally speaking, the lack of care, compassion, and protection can be another wound on the victim. So I've often heard, well, it isn't abuse, he's just not that bright, or he lacks emotional intelligence. As I learn more and see and experience quote unquote foolishness in repetitive same sins being committed against me, so this individual is a victim, I've been wondering, when does the foolishness turn to evil because they lack commitment to change? Are most abusers lacking emotional intelligence? And if so, does this lack mean the victim should not divorce? So let me answer the second question first. No, most abusers do not lack emotional intelligence. Some do. Abuse is primarily a learned behavior. Individuals either learn it through modeling, or I would say through trial and error, because it does work. It does get you what you want in the short term. So I would say emotional intelligence, yeah, I've encountered some individuals who do not know how to communicate, are relationally very immature, emotionally very immature, but that's not always the case. There are some highly skilled, highly creative, very emotionally crafty individuals who use abuse. And again, it's because abusive tactics are learned behaviors, and their developed skills. So to go back to the first part of the question, then, when dealing with psychological abuse, if an individual is skilled at this, then you're probably not dealing with just folly, although all abuse is foolish. Okay, all abuse is foolish, but not all foolishness is abusive. I mean, obviously. So the reason why I say all abuse is foolish is there's a level of folly regardless, right? It's just the Proverbs are all over this. If you read through the Proverbs, you'll really see that heart of abuse throughout. And so one of the things that I would say in addressing the question then about psychological abuse, you're probably not dealing with just a fool or just an individual who lacks emotional intelligence or just an individual that's not too bright. Those three things are actually pretty easily confronted. So, for instance, if we're dealing with foolishness, we know that wisdom is the answer and that God has that in aplenty. So we can address foolishness. It may take time, but we can do it. And there's strategies to that. And certainly, again, reading through the book of Proverbs, there's aspects in which you do not confront a fool, like the one proverb that says, it's better to come upon a mother bear without her cubs, than a fool in his folly. So obviously when he's in the middle of his addiction or his trappings or even his abuse in that regard, it's better just to get away. But wisdom can combat folly, And emotional intelligence, there are skill sets in counseling that can address that. And certainly ignorance can be addressed. I think when we're dealing with abuse, when there's clearly power used to control, then I would really hesitate to say it's just a matter of immaturity. Certainly that's there. And that's one of the hard things about this work, isn't it? Is all of these things are there, and abusers are really good at using that to cast a fog, right? So it can be any number of things. Anxiety can be a fog. Obsessions can be a fog. Things that really cause our vision to kind of narrow to the point that is this really abuse? Is this really what we're talking about? So again, and I know I'm kind of rambling on the answer here, but we come back to the tactics that are being used and the heart behind them. And again, the question was kind of long, so let me see if I feel like I've effectively answered it here. In aspects of psychological abuse, the evidence is there, check. The pattern is there, check. And if you've confronted those aspects of foolishness, ignorance, and he's still persistent, what my friend Leslie would call being willful versus willing, then there's probably a sure respect, and you can be pretty certain that you're dealing with abusive behavior as opposed to something lesser, as it were. So I hope that helps with the question. I'm not sure if I adequately answered it, but I hope that helps. And certainly care, compassion, and protection should be present no matter what the abusive tactic is. And my experience has been too, for the questioner here, my experience has been also that one tactic of abuse is rarely isolated. It's usually joined by others. In fact, that's why it's so important to pull out the pattern and see different aspects of what's happening rather than just one incident. Because really one incident too can be repaired quickly. But usually, generally speaking, abuse is a pattern, right? And so we want to address that, all right, as a pattern. Hello, Mary. I see that. Hi. So there was one question here in the comments too. How would I go about getting you to speak at my mega church and do training? You can reach out to us through the website, chrismoles.org, on the contact tab. Start a conversation with Chelsea, and she'd be glad to tell you and work with you on how you can make that happen. Our teaching schedule is pretty full right now. I know for 2019 and most of 2020, we're booked up. I try to limit my travel schedule to about once a month because I'm still, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm still doing other things, and so I try to limit that because I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm pastoring a church. I'm working at Day Report still. I'm doing Pieceworks. And so we try to limit our travel to about once a month. So most of our dates are booked through 2020. But if you reach out to us and talk to Chelsea, she'll be happy to address that, help you with that. I'm looking up I know there's another question on my phone. I'm looking that up real quick. Hi, Pam Gannon. It's good to see you, buddy. You're the best. Great counselor friend out in Montana. I wouldn't mind being out there right now. Okay, let's see. I know there was a question here. Here it is on my phone. It's another long one, so I'll probably try to summarize this one as well. And we're doing pretty good on time. I'll probably make this one my last question for today. When and how do you suggest church leaders engage in an intervention with a husband who is emotionally and spiritually destructive or abusive, but refuses to get counseling for himself? And then there's several little caveats down in here, like extra things. So the wife is clearly afraid. Let's see. The wife has been told that the church can't make him leave. And she wants to know what type of intervention is appropriate. And it sounds like the church has been giving her spiritual and individual remedies to the problem, such as pray about this, fast about this, etc. So let's go with the big one. When and how do you suggest church leaders conduct an intervention? Well, I always recommend that, with the exception of imminent danger and lethality, that church leaders conduct interventions with permission of the victim and after doing proper safety planning. And one of the things that I think churches really miss, one of the big mistakes I think we make, is rushing ahead in intervention. So we get a disclosure, and then rather than asking the victim for help and understanding her situation and crafting next steps, we tend to run ahead and bully the bully. That's kind of the biggest response is, we're going to take the biggest deacons and biggest elders and we're going to scare this guy, which I actually think is completely counterproductive for a couple reasons. One, when you leave, he's going to be there alone with her. And so you may have just made things a lot worse. And then two, you're just reinforcing the worldview that if you're bigger, stronger, you have more people, that might is right. And I think that Jesus's way is a lot better than power over. It's about power under. So I always recommend, if a church is going to conduct an intervention, that they do so with full victim cooperation, victim approval, and proper safety planning. Now, the one exception, as I said earlier, would be if there's a high lethality, like you really feel like someone is going to be severely injured or possibly killed, which happens in these cases, then you can rush that intervention, and certainly you would want to involve, I would think, law enforcement if there was something criminal. But again, even with criminality disclosures, you want to be careful, because you can do a lot more damage to a victim than helping if you rush. But it sounds like in this case, the victim has already informed the church is aware, but the husband in this case refuses to get counseling for himself. Not at all uncommon. So I would assume that the next steps for the church's part could be church discipline, which again, I would say, let's say everybody claims to be believers, all right? Everybody claims to be a believer in this scenario that we're reading. I would say church discipline began when the victim, confronted him. So if you're using Matthew 18, which I don't recommend in all cases, but in cases here it says of emotional and spiritual abuse, probably Matthew 18's your best bet. If you're dealing with physical or sexual abuse, I would encourage you to read 1 Corinthians 5. If you're dealing with a real backbiting, divisive person, then look into the book of Titus for your church discipline standards. But let's say Matthew 18, which is pretty much what a lot of churches use. I would say it began when she confronted him. And now we're at the next step, right? He's unrepentant, and now he's talked to the church. And it sounds to me like the church is suggesting counseling and he's saying no. So I would be at stage 3 at this point, but I know a lot of churches don't like to jump that quickly. I think we are. I mean, you've given, sounds like clearly an ultimatum to show steps of repentance, and he's choosing not to. You add to that the wife is clearly afraid, and this is a huge category because fear is a big part of this process, that if I were the church leaders, I would want to, if she's asked me for help, I would want to encourage them to intervene, and then in a different way, in a way that's distinct from what they have been doing. Because what we were told in the case here is they can't make him leave and wouldn't ask him to. And I would encourage them to go ahead and ask him to if the wife is afraid, and to begin or continue the process of church discipline if possible. And I would even encourage the victim, if she's willing, to consider civil protective orders and opportunities that could help the church in their discipline process. Because more than likely, if she's afraid, then we probably have enough to pursue an order of protection. Yeah, and there's a lot of other things I guess we could say here, but real quick, by way of warning, I'm saying this just pretty with a lot of ease, I guess, just because of the nature of the question, I believe. But anytime you attempt to leave or set hard boundaries like this or get help in this way, you increase your risk. And so there's definitely a risk of escalation at this point. And it doesn't sound like the church leaders are on board to keep this individual safe. It sounds like they're more concerned with the biblical legality of whether or not separation is viable. And I think that is a very deadly combination. It can be a deadly recipe if you're not careful. And so I would really want to encourage this individual maybe to seek help outside of the church as well, getting some advice from some folks that would really value and prioritize her safety. And I'm not saying the church doesn't care about her safety. I think the church in this case may be getting a little bit distracted by whether or not something is biblically accessible as opposed to the standard of biblical oppression and vulnerability and their role as shepherds. So there may be a isolated reading of 1 Peter 3, for instance, as opposed to a really broad understanding and well-read understanding of 1 Peter 1 through 5. So as shepherds of the flock, they're responsible to protect. And that would be a much more broader understanding than, say, just reading a section of 1 Peter 3 and not wanting to fall into some slippery slope. I would much rather fall into a quote-unquote slippery slope than to leave somebody in a deadly situation or an increasingly violent situation, because you actually have a better chance of providing for the victim's safety. You have a better chance of properly confronting and calling the abuser to repentance, and ultimately a better chance at marriage restoration if that happens down the road. But basically by doing nothing or by doing less than at this point, you actually run the risk of destroying all three. So yeah, I would encourage this individual probably to seek some other outside help that could maybe give them some advice on safety as well. I'm not sure if that's a full enough answer, and I do apologize. Maybe, because there's so much more to the question too. So maybe I will earmark this for a future podcast as well to maybe walk through this case more thoroughly, if that would be okay. It's just hard in a setting for 20 minutes or so. We're a little over, going 25 minutes to fully address something like that. So maybe we'll put it in a future podcast. All right, let me scroll back up. I want to see if there's any other questions I missed. Now, a lot of waving. So I appreciate the waves and the hello and the for joining us today. All right, appreciate you guys. Every second and fourth, is that right? Thursday, we hop on here and do Open Door at 4 and answer your questions. So if you have questions, you can leave them in the comment section here on the Peaceworks Facebook page, or you can submit them through our website, chrismoles.org. Hit the contact tab and send your questions in, and Chelsea can get those off to me. And if this is something that you benefited from, just our brief interaction today, remember that every month we do this on Peaceworks University, much more robust, more full time together at Peaceworks University. So I'd love to have you over there. We're actually in the process of moving towards closing the doors for Peaceworks University this fall to give more attention to our members. And so we're going to be closing the doors down, so you will not be able to join for a while. So if you're a ministry leader or people helper, check out Peaceworks University. We would love to have you in our community. Thank you guys for being part of Open Door at 4. Sorry it was a little bit crazy getting on here today and a little frazzled with my questions, but I think God's honored. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm hopeful that we're benefiting the kingdom, the greater kingdom of God and the church. And until next time, until we see each other again on the next Open Door at 4, God bless.